Hello and welcome to Genetically Podified, the podcast that all your pets are talking about, but you wouldn't know that because you haven't taken the time to learn how to speak animal.
Good morning, James, to you as well.
I'm here, as always, with my wonderful co-host, Roberta. Hi!
Hello, hi everyone.
How are you doing today, Roberta?
I'm good. Didn't get much sleep last night, but yeah, I'm fine, yeah. There's somebody staring at me from the front building.
Is it that naked guy again?
Well, he's not naked. He's like wearing a robe and sitting very comfortably having coffee on the terrace or something like that.
Oh, he's living the life, man. That sounds good.
He's living the life, yeah.
We should stop doing a podcast and just do that.
Oh, that'd be lovely, wouldn't it? But in a much warmer country, may I suggest? A much warmer country. How are you, James?
Definitely.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Also, I've got a severe lack of sleep. I think we both sort of coincidentally woke up at 4 a.m, but for different reasons.
Yeah, indeed.
So the reason I was up was at 4 a.m, my brain just decided to switch on, like it was some sort of computer, just like, do-do-do-do.
Like the old Microsoft 98.
Yeah, exactly. But then, basically, I just spent the next hour not being able to sleep, only being able to think about fucking structural readjustment. Do you know about that?
No, what's that?
It's these agriculture policies that the West has enforced on the developing world, which is kind of fucking them over. And my brain just wouldn't stop thinking about it. But it was interesting, but just, I'd rather not at 4 a.m.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, that's what I was going to say, but it's definitely an interesting topic. I woke up at 4 a.m. I wasn't able to make any sense of anything. So, applause to you for thinking straight.
Applause, but don't do it again, brain. Don't do it again. Okay, let's get going. Before we begin, the views expressed here are our own, nobody else's. Okay. So yeah, in this episode, it's all the reins to Roberta. She's going to be taking us through the complex and crazy world of GM legislation.
Yes.
So I think the order of service today is to look at the US legislation and then the EU legislation and then just have a good old chinwag about it. Is that right?
Yes, that's right, James, because I've studied GMO legislation in the EU before. Because I was working at the European Commission. Well, not working, like I was doing a traineeship at the European Commission for a few months. So I got really involved in this sort of things. And then a really good comparison, because it is a completely different regulation to that, is the EU regulation. And I'm not really familiar with regulations on GM all over the world. I know that some countries allow them, some countries have no regulation at all, which makes it really difficult to control movement of GM, but I'm not really familiar with those. So I thought I'd take my experience with the EU regulation, because the UK is still, until further notice, in the EU, and then see how it differs from the US. I thought that'd be a good thing to do.
Yeah, sounds great. Take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to start from the US because, as you might know, the US has a very much simpler way of regulating GMOs. One could argue by not regulating them at all. Basically.
That's definitely simpler, yeah.
I'm joking. I mean, it's not exactly like that, but it kind of is. And I'm going to tell you how in a minute. So the US does not have a legal framework that is specific to GMOs. So GMOs are considered, depending on their application, within the regulation of other things. So if it's a GMO that has to do with pesticides and stuff like that, the EPA gets involved. Mm-hmm. If it's something that has to do with food, FDA gets involved.
So EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in the US,
yes.
FDA, Food and Drug Administration.
The USDA is the Department of Agriculture. But yes, depending on their application, they fall under different sets of regulations. So it's kind of a sensible choice, if you ask me. I'm really happy with that. But again, I'm a very GMO positive. I'm not going to say like I'm a pro-GMO person, but I'm a GMO enthusiast. Let's put it that way.
That's a good way of putting it.
So it's kind of an idea that makes a lot of sense to have a regulation depending on the application of the technology and not the technology itself. And we will see the difference with that with the EU in a minute. But yeah, so basically what happens with the US, GMO regulation is much older than the EU one. And they have a really, really wide range of GMOs at the minute. They cultivate a lot of them. There are like a few ones that stand out of the crowd, mostly herbicide-resistant crops and pest-resistant crops. But basically, the way that they are regulated is, in the past, if you were to put something that is GM on the market, if this has never been done before, if it does not resemble anything that is currently on the market, you have to go through a really long procedure so that the FDA, the USDA, or whoever it is, can say, yes, this is safe for humans, for the environment, for animals. We can allow you to put it on the market. So initially for GMOs, there was like this procedure, but then moving forward from that, there is this, what they call substantial equivalence principle. So basically, if you are making a GMO and there is no substantial difference from its non-GMO counterpart, you can just put it on the market like that. And it doesn't require any obligatory or mandatory approval process. You basically do kind of a voluntary health and safety assessment sort of thing, but it's on a voluntary basis.
That's weird.
And it's weird. It's kind of cool if you think about it, but it's weird. If you think about what we go through in the EU, which again, we're going to explore in a minute.
Yeah.
This is a completely different mindset. And that is because the US has listened to scientific evidence, which in these times sounds
Who does that? That's not cool.
These are
we don't need any of that. No, thank you, sir.
But yeah, basically based on scientific evidence and based on the fact that they've been eating them for quite a while now, they have decided that they're safe based on the substantial equivalent principle. And then because of the substantial equivalent principle, they apply what is called a GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe. So because these GMOs have been around for a while, they're recognized as safe. And then when they're recognized as safe, they can be deregulated.
Yeah.
And being deregulated means that they don't need any risk assessment whatsoever anymore, ever.
Yeah, so if you had like BT corn, I don't know if this is one of them.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah.
BT corn wouldn't have any more risk assessment than regular corn would have.
Yeah, ever. Like ever, forevermore.
Yeah.
And that is, again, quite different from the EU, and we'll see that in a minute. So let's say I'm a company that today wants to put something GM on the market, and it is a new GM. Let's say I want to make a GM lemon that has insulin in it. I took the first two things that came into my mind.
Yeah, sure.
That is not true, it's not real, nothing like that. But because insulin is not normally present in lemons, that would have to go through what is called the additives regulation, because it's food, but there is no GMO framework on that. It's the added thing that needs to be regulated.
Yeah, well, that makes sense to me, yeah.
It does. Like, if you were making a new snack and you wanted to put a new additive in it, you would have to go through a regulation that has to make sure that that thing is safe. And that makes a lot of sense because it's not naturally present in food, or has never been put in food before, or has never been put in that specific food before. So it's still a little bit foggy to me. Like, I still struggle to understand it, but I don't have a legal background. I don't come from law school. So if you guys out there know a little bit more about the US regulation, please let us know. And if I got it wrong, please let me know. This is what I understood from what I found out on the available things on the internet.
I've got a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
So the first one, it was in terms of, I've forgotten your phrase, but like, substantially different, substantial change.
Substantial equivalence, yeah.
Substantial equivalent. So I can get it with like the Arctic apple, that makes sense to me. Yeah, because you're not adding anything, you are just changing the regulation of a gene. Yes. The apple is the same. Yeah. Largely the same. The lemon and the insulin sort of semi-makes sense to me, in that I would argue that a lemon with insulin, even though that insulin has been shown to be useful for us, I mean, we produce it ourselves, I would argue that the lemon has been substantially changed because it's now got a chemical that's an animal chemical.
Yes, exactly, yes.
So does that count as substantially changed, even though insulin is known to be okay for us? that it counts as substantially changed.
I'll give you a better example of that. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. Have you ever heard of the Impossible Burger?
Is that the one run from plant proteins? Is that one?
Kinda. So basically, it's a burger that has been made out of vegetable products. It has beetroot in it. It's got coconut oil flakes, so that you see those like grains of fat in it. It looks exactly like meat. If you Google it, it looks exactly alike.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah, it looks tasty.
And as you cook it, it browns exactly as a normal burger, and it remains raw in the middle. And that is given by an extra ingredient, which is the heme group. The heme group is basically what makes blood red.
Yeah, it binds the oxygen so that you can breathe.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that is found in red blood cells, and it's part of the hemoglobin. Basically, that is being produced from GM yeast. So they've put it out on the market. They haven't applied for deregulation because we eat it all the time. Like meat eaters eat it all the time. And that is a vegetarian heme because yeast is considered vegetarian. So it's kind of a cool thing, but it is a new ingredient that has never been produced that way before. So there has been an outcry for people who were concerned that this ingredient has not been tested before. But it's a very grey area, I think. There is a huge grey area and the line is not defined. And that's why I say I don't really understand a lot about US regulation. I still struggle to understand it. And I think it's because it's on a case-by-case basis. And a lot of scientists around the world are saying that that is a better way to go rather than criticizing the technology and trying to define the technology.
I agree. That's my stance as well, is that the technology is fine. You just have to take it at a case-by-case basis and do what makes sense given the science. And I would say the legislation about this does make sense, like just looking it up on Wikipedia. Basically, the heme that they use is actually from plants, but they produce it in yeast because it's just quicker. So they've got heme from the soy plant, and then put it into yeast.
Right, okay.
So you're actually eating plant heme. So you're not even eating yeast heme if you don't like yeast for whatever reason. If you don't like beer. Or bread.
Yeah, or pizza.
The other thing that I just want to mention here, just for listeners, a lot of the time Wikipedia is good, but if there's something you're not quite sure about what they've said, you should look at their references. And one of the things they say on this Wikipedia page is that plant heme and meat heme is identical. And instantly, as a scientist, that struck me as not being right as far as I know, because plants and humans have a lot of genes that perform similar functions, but they are almost invariably different in some way. And the references they've put in for that comment don't say anything to do with plants. So just a little warning with stuff like that. Always check the references. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean it's not okay for you to eat, because, like I said before, we eat heme by eating plants anyway. So I still think it's a fine use of this legislation.
Just to wrap the US up, I still struggle to fully understand exactly how it works. But again, I think it's on a case-by-case setting. One thing that I really like about their way of regulating GM is that there is a period of time where the approval procedure is put on stall and there is a public open debate, which I think is kind of a cool thing to have. I think it's cool, but it's not in any ways a structured debate. So most of the times you will find anti-GMO groups or like activist groups that collect a lot of signatures and say, oh no, we don't want that. It's a one direction debate as well. I mean, the company can, I don't know if, I guess the company can comment as well, but it feels like I would love to study that thing.
There's a PhD in there, definitely.
Like, there could be a PhD there, because it can help, but it can be also detrimental sometimes. But it's something that, for example, the EU doesn't have. The fact that the EU doesn't have that is because the whole process is put upside down and reversed and made more complicated and wrapped up in many different ways. And that is basically because where the US says, let's put them out there unless they are proven unsafe, the EU says, let's not put them out there until we've proven they are safe. So it's like the complete opposite. And in the EU, what we have is called the precautionary principle. So just in case, we'll not put it out there. If we have a tiny doubt that something is unsafe, we'll not put it out there. Now, That is true for all things in the EU, for additives, new preservatives, flavorings, anything that has to do with food is dealt with by the European Food Safety Authority, which is EFSA. But basically, the European Food Safety Authority deals with all these things. Now, GM is a weird one because, as you can see from the US experience, GM is safe. All the GM that has been on the market so far has been safe for human consumption. Yep. If we take on to the environmental side of things, we might argue a completely different story. But from a health perspective, they are safe.
Yeah.
And that is what has been proven by the European Food Safety Authority so far. Yeah. So if you want to go with me through the approval procedure and bear with me for like 5 minutes, I have a children's book with me that explain the approval procedure of genetically modified organisms.
Can I just quickly ask, what child wants to read that?
I know.
Well, I get it. We've got PhDs in this topic. Like, 6-year-old James would not give a fuck about that book.
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry.
Also, no, absolutely. Also because it's about regulation. And I mean, regulation is boring. I mean, sorry to all the people who work with regulation, but I find it extremely tedious. Yeah. But yeah, basically the European Commission at some point in their life, the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission released this small booklet and they did a project with kids and tried to explain things to them. And it's quite nice. It looks really pretty. I'm not going to read the story to you, James, because I don't want you to fall asleep. But basically, it explains the story of Kearney and Kiko. Kearney, because kernel, you know, they are two corn cobs that want to go to the... It's really cute. It's adorable. There are two corn cobs that want to go to the EU. There are two GMO corn cobs.
So these are these are basically designer corn babies.
Yes.
Terrible. Evil.
Literally, yeah. Evil. Yeah. But basically, if you were a company, or if you were one of these two corn cobs and wanted to go to the EU and you were GM, you would have to go through a very lengthy approval procedure. So, okay, I'm going to try and say it as quickly as I can, as easily as I can. Let's say you want to sell this corn in Italy. You have to go to the national authorities and say, I want to sell this thing to you. How do I do that? And you have to bring a folder, a metaphorical folder full of all the information that have to do with the kind of modification that you did, with all the studies, including field studies, lab studies, and methodology studies, where you have tried traces of this gem in food, for example. Because the thing with regulation, because in the US it's not regulated strictly or labeled, there is no rules on like the amount of GM that you can find in certain foods. You don't really need these kinds of stuff. But because in the EU you have limits, especially on non-authorized GM stuff. So if you find a non-authorized GM trace in some food, there is a whole thing that starts and it's like, oh yeah, we have to find what that is and blah, blah. There's like a whole procedure and a whole mechanism that starts, and it's really complicated because there is this regulation in place. So we have to be able in the EU to trace them back. So to like basically analyze a food, and if there is a certain amount of GM, we have to be able to tell, yeah, there is that amount of GM. So it's kind of complicated, but yeah, let's step back. Okay, so you go to the member state and you bring all these tests and all these documents with all the analysis and stuff. And the member state says, yay, cool. Okay, now you have to go to EFSA. EFSA is the European Food Safety Authority. And what they will do is they will collect all this scientific evidence that tells me that your thing is safe, and they will study it. So they will study the evidence, and at the end, they will make a risk assessment. And at the end of the risk assessment, they will give a science-based opinion. So they will give a scientific opinion. So EFSA doesn't do the tests and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It just basically analyzes all the evidence that you bring, and they do this. In the meantime, what you have to do is go to the Joint Research Centre, which is where I was when I was doing my internship, and say, okay, I've got this GM. I want you to verify that my method to find my GM and trace it in food is fine. And that's what the JRC does, the Joint Research Centre. They basically validate your methodology and say, yeah, we can find it. It's cool. There's 10 milligrams of that. Yeah, we can say that there's 10 milligrams of that by analyzing it, blah, blah, blah. And they say, okay, you're cool to go. Go back to EFSA. So you go back to EFSA. And EFSA, in the meantime, usually is, I think it's 10 years for the approval procedure. Like, the whole entire approval procedure takes ages because bureaucracy sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically, once you've gone to EFSA again, EFSA in the meantime should be able to say, yes, we're cool with this, or no, this is not safe, fuck off.
Yeah.
Like, those are the options. And if they say, yeah, this is cool, this is safe, and just to give you an information about this, they have said that for each and every single one of the available GMs on the market.
Wow.
So all the GMs out there have been approved by EFSA, and EFSA said they are all safe.
Yeah.
So EFSA said they are safe. So you say, yeah, cool, EFSA, YOLO, see you the next time I apply, I won't see you again anymore, because now I'm going to the European Commission. So the EFSA sends a metaphorical letter to the European Commission saying, we think that this is safe. What do you guys think? What should we do? It's up to you now. And at the European Commission, there is a committee of experts. I'm making quotes in the air right now. Lots of quotes in the air. No, bless them. I mean, they do a really hard job. One for each member state. And they have to decide, based on the scientific evidence, if they want it or not. And what happens at the European Commission, and has been happening at the European Commission for a very, very long time now, is a 50-50 kind of situation.
Okay.
So whenever you read that the EU is really bad the EU bans GM, you're wrong.
Oh, right.
The EU doesn't ban GM. There is a 50-50 split between member states, among member states. So 50% of member states in the EU want GM and 50% don't. And there's a whole discussion that we could have about that and how these are not necessarily science-based decisions, but they are political decisions. There's a lot more going on. And of course, you know, if you come from a country where the pesticide industry is pretty big, you might not want a multinational company from the US to bring a pest-resistant crop.
Yeah, sure.
You know, conflicts of interest and stuff like that. It is the European Commission, but still, I mean, the interests of the individual member states have to be preserved. And if I were a representative of my own member state, I would have to do my job and preserve the industry. There's a lot of things going on there.
Yeah.
But okay, so basically, because of that 50-50 situation, the decision goes back to the European Commission, so to the actual commissioners. And the European Commission then says, okay, so you haven't managed to make a decision. Damn you, you've been doing this for the past 40 years. And then they go to an appeal committee. So there is another committee. And again, guess what? 50-50 again, because of course, if we couldn't decide earlier, what has changed, right? So the decision goes back again to the European Commission, and European Commission then says, fuck all of you, I hate you, do whatever you want, I don't care. No, basically what the European Commission says is, in my opinion, this is safe, and EFSA says that it's safe, so it is allowed, but member states then do whatever they want nonetheless. So the European Commission is really annoyed at the minute because this has been going on for a very long time. So they have now introduced a regulation that says, okay, if you don't want to have GMOs on your territory, either them being cultivated or sold, basically what you can do is opt out of this regulation. And they say, okay, if you don't want them for reasons other than scientific evidence, just tell me and opt out. And that's what's been happening recently. So, for example, in the UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales have opted out of the cultivation of GMOs. Yeah. And I'm not sure about the marketing as well. I know I can find GMOs in the supermarket in the UK. And I've eaten GMOs that were on the Tesco shelves. Or the other thing is you might find GMOs in American snacks. So if you buy Pop-Tarts, because of the labeling regulations, because that's something I didn't mention, the EU also has rules on labeling. So if there is more than 0.9% of GM in one thing, you have to say it.
Okay.
And so any product that contains GM that might not be labeled in the US, if it comes from the US and contains GM, has to be labeled here. So I was looking at the label of Pop-Tarts the other day, and that's what it was. There was GM in there. So if you buy Pop-Tarts, it's likely GM, yeah.
If it's got any high fructose corn syrup in it, that's likely GM as well. Because that often comes from BT corn.
Exactly. But then, I mean, that's when the job of the Joint Research Centre becomes really difficult. Because if it's a highly processed food, it's really hard to find DNA in it to be able to analyze it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because DNA degrades with temperature and with time. So if it's like the whole seed, then it's one thing. But if it's a processed food and that has been cooked or filtered or stuff like that, DNA is a very big molecule.
Yeah.
Oils, for example, like even olive oil, which is usually a pressed oil, is not an extracted oil. Even olive oil has really, really small traces of DNA in it. Yeah. Because that's the thing, like you want to separate the oil from everything else. Yeah. So, of course, it's really hard to find DNA in it.
And again, like we've talked about, just because there's DNA in there doesn't actually mean it's functional DNA, and it doesn't mean it's doing anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Often that DNA is going to be actually cut up by certain proteins called DNases, which cut up DNA into loads of fragments and parts, and DNA can't do anything when it's in that state. So just because you find DNA in something doesn't make it a bad thing.
Yeah. So imagine you as an analyst, as a scientist in one of the JRC labs, trying to not only find some DNA, trying to find some functioning DNA that resembles the piece of DNA that you inserted inside the thing, because that's the only way that you can make sure that it's there. So you basically, if you have put a new gene in there, let's say you're analyzing soybean oil and you have made it, I don't know, rich in omega-3s, and you've inserted genes that produce omega-3s, the only way for you to make sure that that thing is there is by finding those genes. So you have to find a specific piece of DNA as well. It's extremely hard. I mean, there are protocols in place for that. And there are ways where you can like say, oh yeah, this has been cooked for this amount of time, so the DNA will be degraded, blah, blah, blah. But it's really tough. It's really tough. And like my question is there a point? If it's a regulated and approved GMO and there are traces of residual oil in something, like, does it matter if it's been approved?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of like going, why bother? You know, it's a different thing for unauthorized GMOs.
Yeah, of course.
That is a really cool area of science. It was really fun to listen to people who were working or had like unauthorized GMO emergencies, where basically they would like sequence the whole DNA to try and understand what it was and where it came from and stuff. It's really interesting stuff. And of course, it's kind of scary because it's something that it's not approved, has not been, it might have happened by chance, by just cross-pollination or something like that. But, you know, anyways, so that is basically it. Just to sum it up, there is this whole regulation in place, and at the end of it, the European Commission just says, fuck it, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. They gave up on us.
Yeah, they kind of did. And the last thing that I would like to mention about this is that the European Commission regulates GMOs basically from recombinant DNA onwards. So in one of our episodes, we talk about different techniques and different ways and different definitions. We've spoken about different definitions of GM. Basically, the legal definition of GM in the EU starts from recombinant DNA. So mutagenesis produced crops are not included in that. And at the same time, there is the conundrum of gene editing techniques because they kind of resemble mutagenesis crops. We'll talk about that in the future. So keep listening to us and we'll talk about that. But there is a problem there that is still standing, and the European Commission has been trying to think of how to regulate or not regulate these new things that look like very old things. I'm being very, what's the word in English for that?
Vague.
Yeah.
But it's going to be covered soon, so don't worry about it.
Enigmatic.
Yeah. Gene editing, we've got an episode that we're actually recording later today.
Right now,
So it's coming, don't worry.
Yeah. But that's it. That's all you have to know about regulation. Do you have any question, James?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So you found some stuff that's GM now in UK supermarkets?
Yes, I have.
Is that only since the opt-out thing came in?
No. I don't think so.
Okay,
So the UK has actually voted in favor almost every single time for either, I'm not sure about the cultivation of GMOs, but definitely for the marketing of GMOs.
Okay, so it's been marketing GMOs, well, not itself, but having American GM products in the UK, even before this opt-out option.
Yes.
Oh, right.
You can find GMOs in Italy as well.
Right, okay.
Because Italy is culturally very against GMOs, but according to regulation, you can sell them in the supermarkets, and it's fine. You cannot cultivate them. That is a different story. And again, it's weird, isn't it? That the UK actually has GMOs on shelves.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't even know about that.
It is very weird.
Is weird.
You probably wouldn't find it in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland.
Yeah, because they feel more strongly about it.
Yeah, they feel very strongly about it.
Just like a final quick point from me. So I just looked up, out of interest, which countries have opted out and which have not opted out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a 2/3 to 1/3 split. So just from my rough counting, there were 19 requests to opt out. And then everyone else didn't opt out, so they stayed in. And the ones that have opted into the GM package are Sweden, England, Spain, Finland, Czech Republic, Portugal, Netherlands, Estonia, Slovakia, and Romania.
Spain is the only country that actually cultivates GM corn.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. That Monsanto one.
Yeah, it's called Mon 810, and it's one variety of GM corn that is resistant to weevil. So thanks for tuning in. Sorry, I hope you had coffee with you. Maybe I should have mentioned that at the very beginning of this thing. I tried to make it fun and interesting. But yeah, regulation is kind of complex and it's still changing and evolving because of the latest techniques. And with Brexit, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah.
We don't really know what's the regulation going to be in a few years. So we'll hopefully the podcast will still be on.
Hopefully the man won't shut us down. All right.
Yeah, right?
I'm going to wrap up quickly just because it's 5 minutes before my laptop might restart. Thanks, Roberta, for that great explanation.
You're very
If
welcome.
anyone has any questions or any comments that they'd like to let us know about, you can let us know either by Twitter, where you can reach us at @GenPodified, or you can email us at geneticallypodified@gmail.com. If you are in the reviewing sort of mood and you like us, if you don't like us, tell us somewhere different so we can improve. But if you enjoyed listening to this and want to tell other people about it, please do so. Tell your friends. I mean, your pets are already super keen, so you don't have to tell them. Leave us a review anywhere that you listen to this podcast. That would be super helpful to us. And have a great week. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye. See ya.
Later.